As the Russian invasion enters a third month inside Ukraine's borders, outside, the war now threatens food security across the globe.
That's right. According to the International Food Policy Research Institute, Ukraine and Russia combined provide 30% of the world's wheat. That's just one of the major exports being strained by the ongoing conflict. And joining us now is the Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs at the U.S. Department of State, Ramin Toloui. Thank you for being with us, Ramin. And yes, we just mentioned so much of the world's food comes out of Russia and Ukraine. In addition to wheat, they're major suppliers of corn, barley, sunflower seed oil, and certainly what's happening there is a threat to global food security. So when do you think we're actually going to see this threat become a reality?
First of all, good morning, Amy. Thank you for having me. We've all seen the devastating images of civilians killed and damage to civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. And unfortunately, the tragedy of this war is not limited to those images. Its consequences are being felt all over the world because Russia has started a war between two of the largest agricultural producers. Ukrainian farmers face the choice between fighting invading forces or fleeing. Russian missiles have destroyed ships in the Black Sea carrying, including those cargo ships carrying agricultural goods. Russian bombs have destroyed rail lines, which get Ukrainian foodstuffs to European markets. And so this is having a disruptive effect, raising global food prices. That's being felt in places like the United States and Europe, but it's also being felt in among some of the most vulnerable populations in the world that already were on the edge of food insecurity. And international agencies have estimated that an additional 40 million people will be at risk of food insecurity because of this conflict.
You mentioned food prices, but also famine is something that President Zelensky has mentioned, and in particular areas, Africa, Asia. Where do you all see as the areas that are most at risk right now in the world?
Well, just yesterday, the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Development Agency, USAID, announced that they were drawing from an emergency trust fund to help address some of the most critically affected countries. That includes Kenya, Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, and Yemen. So those are some that are most vulnerable. And the good news is that American farmers are some of the most productive and efficient in the world. That's one reason that we don't face a food security problem here in the United States. And in fact, our farmers, through things like this trust fund, are able to act as part of the solution to some of the most critically impacted countries that I mentioned.
Yeah, and Ramin, we've obviously seen this war rage on with no end in sight, truly, and waiting for, as we just pointed out, the threat to actually become a reality. But how long do you believe the impact will be of what we're seeing now there on the ground in Ukraine for the rest of the world? Is this going to be something that we're going to be feeling the effects of for months, for years?
Well, unfortunately, the answer to that really resides with Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin started this war. He's been intent on prosecuting this war. That's despite the overwhelming pressure from the international community reflected in overwhelming votes, for example, at the United Nations General Assembly to end this war and all of the humanitarian consequences that are flowing from it. So we at the State Department, the United States, is continuing to press for this conflict to end. For Ukrainian civilians to no longer be under threat from Russian military forces, and for the collateral damage for all of these vulnerable populations around the world that are feeling the food insecurity problems, consequences of this war, to bring that to an end as swiftly as possible.
You mentioned American farmers, but do American farmers and farmers anywhere else in the world, is there any way to ramp up in such a way to make up for what's being lost because of the war? Is that just not really an option?
Well, the good news is that, the high agricultural prices are encouraging greater production, both in the United States, other countries. Of course, there are limits in terms of crops that are already in the ground and the current planting season. But those higher prices and additional efforts from producers here and other parts of the world can increase that supply. And one of our focuses at the State Department is to help get some of that supply to some of the most critical, where the needs are most critical in vulnerable countries.
Well, Ramin Toloui, Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Quite the title there. And we do appreciate your time here this morning, or this afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff here. So go on, click the subscribe button right over here to get more of awesome videos and content from GMA every day, anytime. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the morning on GMA.